Welcome to the Impulse Spotlight, a podcast for product development professionals. In this episode, we interview our very first guest, someone I'm proud to call a friend, who's an oyster shucker turned engineer. Chad Robbins grew up in a family of oyster shuckers. His grandfather started a catering business that focused on oysters, and he spent many a weekend steaming and shucking oysters for parties around Baltimore. His cousin is actually a national oyster shucking champion. In his downtime, Chad loves to get out in nature, go camping, mountain biking, and off-roading. And he's most proud of positively impacting our planet and the teams we work with through our professional lives. In this episode, Chad spotlights 3 separate products in the Baby Jogger City Collection and how each product followed a different design path in order to become a finished idea. We also discuss alternative tools and production methods used within infant care products when designers face unique challenges, as well as the importance of choosing the right suppliers for the task at hand. Finally, we look into the emerging need within the consumer market for durable and sustainable products. Let's get into it. Hey, Chad, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so to begin, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into product development?
Sure. So, I was born and raised Baltimore, Maryland. Lived in a house with, both my mom and my dad were very hands-on. Always doing DIY projects, renovations. Some of the hobbies I had growing up too kind of got me into mechanical things, whether it's fixing bikes or RC cars, so I've always kind of been around being hands-on, working with tools, loved it. So it came time to look for, think about a career in colleges. And I knew from day one I was going to be an engineer. I dabbled in nuclear engineering to try to be different, realized it just wasn't where my heart was. So ended up in mechanical engineering. And I went to Georgia Tech and looking for co-op jobs, kind of explored all possible industries. But even from the time I was perusing jobs, research and development kind of jumped to the top as being, wow, this could be really fun to, create things, build them, and then see them out in the wild. And landed a co-op in medical devices and really never looked back. I fell in love with it, and 20 years later, I'm still digging it every day. So that's
Cool.
how I got here.
Very cool. So what's your current role? What kind of products do you develop now?
So work for Newell Brands. I lead the Nook North America research and development team. So Nook is baby care items, think pacifiers, bottles, cups, tableware, breast pumps, all those sorts of things.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about the product that you want to talk about today and why you chose that one in particular.
Sure. So the platform is the City Home Collection from Baby Jogger. Really proud of the collection. So Baby Jogger, if you're not familiar with it, it's the roots where it was, the original jogging stroller was invented by Baby Jogger years and years ago. And for the longest time, they focused on strollers, higher end strollers, very durable designs, premium, nice aesthetics geared towards that kind of on the go mom. But we wanted to kind of expand the brand and branch it into new categories. So I was responsible for bringing it into the home category. So we had developed a suite of 3 different home products. There was a play yard, a play space / sleeping space, then a high chair, and then an infant seat, a bouncer rocker seat. So 3 really awesome products. And I think the reason I'm so proud of them is, one, they look great. Check them out on babyjogger.com. But what we were going with is really because it was a new space, we needed some new technology to kind of get us into the space and really kind of make a splash. So we coupled some really great technology really around on the go and folding and lightweight, and coupled that with some really great premium aesthetics. And it's not always easy to have, great technology coupled with great aesthetics, just because a lot of times the technology, the mechanisms detract from the clean look. But really proud of how they turned out. And then, we can talk about it, but the path to market for each of these 3 were very different suppliers, different development processes. So
cool. Are there any other, you talked about a little bit, but are there any other features or innovations or things that we wouldn't know about the product just by looking at it?
Yeah, so each of the three have something novel about them, which is great, and not easy to do in such a big collection. But yeah, the rocker bouncer is kind of one of a kind. It has two different types of mom powered motions, folds flat, really nice portable compact product, soothing product. The high chair is incredibly small when folded. It's for the most part a full featured high chair, but the fold is really what differentiates it in the market, and just that really clean aesthetic. Looks great in the home. And then finally, the play yard. You would notice the claims of lightest play yard, lightest multi-level play yard in the market in the world. But we've also added some features, spring-loaded legs, for example, to kind of aid in that fold and portable aspect of it.
Cool. How you mentioned the high chair folded up pretty small. How small does it get?
So it's kind of a three-dimensional fold. So it not only folds, flat, but also the height kind of compresses down too. Maybe, gosh, put me on the spot here. A big briefcase.
Oh wow.
But yeah, easily just throw it in the closet when you're not using it. So yeah, really, really nice product.
Cool. Were there any novel or interesting technologies, materials, methods used to develop these products?
A lot of them use kind of our standard metal forming processes and injection molding, soft goods design. I'd say the one thing to call out maybe on the high chair is we were going for a very, this premium aesthetic, but a very kind of dynamic, active aesthetic. And one of the ways the ID team wanted to get that was through kind of these complex tube shapes. So they wanted this, tapered tube design in the rear, which is, not easy to produce. And we've looked at a lot of different ways to produce that, but we ultimately went down the path of hydroforming, which if you're not familiar with it, it's essentially you take a standard tube, put it into a mold, and inject fluid inside to kind of expand that tube outward to the mold, so you can get some really complex shapes. So this was outside of our supply base, so we had to find some new suppliers to do this. A lot of learnings on the limitations of the process, but ultimately it was something that we felt very strong about to just elevate the aesthetic.
Very cool. So walk us through the journey of developing the product. Like, how did it get from an idea to something on the shelf?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, each of these has very different paths to launch. I guess for all three of these, we kind of had to start with, how to scope the project and what that scope should be. So really going back to the roots of who Baby Jogger is as a brand. It's around being active and portable and not letting your little one kind of impede your lifestyle. So that's what worked on the stroller side. We wanted to bring it to the home side. So we said, okay, they have to be able to fold. They have to be lightweight, easy to move around. So we tested, some different concepts with consumers to see what consumers would gravitate towards in terms of feature set. Once we had that identified, then it was a matter of how do we go about developing the product. So each of these had a different development path. So the rocker bouncer was actually the bouncing rocking technology had been developed by a supplier. We had then rolled it into the Baby Jogger aesthetic, used the industrial design from our team, and then incorporated this fold flat design. So that was a pretty streamlined development process because we had a nice starting point that we were really able to leverage. And we maintained the same supplier from the entire development of the project. So very much streamlined from that standpoint. The high chair was a bit more complex. So scoped as a ultra compact high chair, full featured high chair. We started it as what we call an ODM model. So we leveraged the development resources of the suppliers. So we scoped them on the size requirements of the fold and kind of generally what we want it to look like. and let them do some exploration. After some time with that, we realized that it just wasn't working out. The path they were going down just wasn't a robust design. It was a bit of a rickety design. So we decided to bring that in-house, convert it to a full OEM development where we use our internal resources to do completely the development on it. So yeah, we did the internal, the development, prototyped it, proof of concepts, got industrial design involved, soft goods, fully developed the product. And then we took it to back to that initial supplier, let them make some adjustments to fit their process, get the costing. Unfortunately, the costing came in really high at that point. So we did have to pivot very late in the game and find another supplier that could hit our cost targets, which required some further tweaks to the design as well to fit within that new supplier's capabilities. So that was the high chair, a bit of back and forth. And the play yard was a very similar story. We had started it with, we took a standard travel play yard, kind of the functionality, the fold mechanism, and then we added features to make it easier to fold, make it lighter weight, and add this, I guess I didn't talk about it, but we have the elevated sleep surface. The bassinet is we kind of called it an integrated bassinet, where all the structure needed for that elevated sleep surface was always attached to the play yard, and it would stow away in a zippered pouch in a really clean manner underneath the top rail of the play yard. So we had a nice starting point. We layered on some additional technology. We initially had scoped a supplier to do some of this development work, and again, we just had some issues with how that was going. So we brought this one internally as well, and turned it to an OEM development. And this was OEM development the entire way through. And when we started looking for suppliers, we kind of considered all the options, but we did have an internal plant that has some very good soft goods capabilities that was a perfect fit for this. So we were able to produce it in our own plant, and so that was it for that one. But
cool. I assume with the different complexities that they all had different timelines.
Yeah, so they all had to launch at the same time. We got some end caps at some of the major retailers, and we kind of wanted to release it all, in one big splash. But yeah, development timeline is different. So the rocker bouncer was I would say they all kind of were kicked off about the same time. Bouncer rocker just had a lot more cushion in there. That was a very streamlined development. I would say that one could have probably gone 12 months start to finish. The other two were, 2.5 years. But yeah, we kind of launched them all at the same time.
Cool. Tell us a little bit about your team. How many people were involved in the development, and what were the different roles?
Sure. A lot of cross-functional skill sets came together to make this happen. I think one of the two common threads that we had throughout, which was really helpful, is one solid brand marketer to kind of guide these and make sure that they're all a cohesive lineup. And same thing with the industrial designer. We had one industrial designer that spanned all three. This just helps that cohesion and consistency between the platforms. Mm-hmm. And then supporting that, we had engineering, obviously takes a bit more resources. So we had probably a half of a head on the rocker bouncer. And we were able to streamline that just because we were leveraging the development resources of the supplier.
Sure.
The play yard, we had 2 full-time engineers for on and off, but for most of the project. And then the high chair had, I would say probably 3 engineers, not all of them full-time allocated to it, but off and on based on skill sets needed throughout the development. And then there was soft goods designers. I think we had 2 soft goods designers. The play yard was very labor intensive, and a lot of work went into kind of getting that clean aesthetic. So I would say probably a full soft goods engineer on the play yard, and then the other 2 were another soft goods designer. And then of course there's some fashion color folks along the way that kind of sprinkle in, but Yeah, a lot of people have to come together to kind of make it happen.
What were some of the key milestones that you guys reached throughout the development?
Yeah, sure. So milestones. I think the first big one is that concept test that we do, where it's very high level screening that this general idea is something that consumers would embrace and that they would buy. So once we have that, it can kind of kick us off into the detailed development. So that was a big milestone. I'd then say, proof of concept models, where we figure out the mechanism that we're going to use to kind of achieve the functionality we need. That's another big one. But again, those could be, even like Frankenstein models, RP models, not very refined. Yeah, and then I mean the other last big is just what we would call like a design freeze, which is incorporating in a prototype the final industrial design aesthetic with production representative parts that the entire team can play with. We can get consumers to interact with, and kind of everybody hold hands and say, yeah, this is what we want to launch. So those are kind of big milestones. Then I mean, of course, we got to get into production and validate and all that, but yeah.
Cool. What were the biggest challenges you guys faced? You mentioned the supplier issues and all that, but what would you see as the biggest challenge you guys faced during the development?
Yeah, so the high chair, just packing so much mechanism into something that's got to look great was really challenging, and have the structure of a typical high chair. The rigidity of a typical high chair. So that took a lot of iteration. And one of the main reasons we brought it in-house. We were able to kind of use some mechanisms from some other strollers and high chairs to kind of limit what we had to develop. But yeah, that for sure was a challenge, a lot of iteration. The play yard itself was incredibly challenging. I think the soft goods development was probably one of the hardest things to nail on that one. So when set up, we want the play yard to look really clean. So tight fabrics, just have that really premium aesthetic. Of course, when it folds, now all of a sudden those tight fabrics are going to kind of impede the folding. So yeah, trying to figure out a way to either have fabric stretch where needed, but not necessarily everywhere, or slide and kind of get out of the way of some of the mechanisms so it can fold. But then, of course, when you set it back up, you need everything to return to that tight position. So easier said than done, and it's something that you would never kind of notice when just looking at the product itself. But yeah, a lot went into that. And then actually just getting the spring-loaded legs to operate the way we wanted to was shockingly challenging. We started with some gas springs, thinking that was would have a nice kind of slow dampened spring effect. The problem with them is they're expensive. They don't last forever. We were having trouble finding a good supplier with them. So we ended up just going to a standard kind of spring piston design and kind of manually doing some of that dampening. But even that proved to be challenging because you have this spring tension on your latch, which is going to put friction in your latch, and it's going to make the button hard to operate. So a lot we had to overcome with that. But yeah, with all product development, there's always little things along the way. There's just kind of bumps that you got to overcome, and but ended up working out.
With regards to the spring, does that allow for it to automatically fold, or does it just assist with the fold?
So there's basically two operations to get it to fold. There's the four legs have to be there's a button for each leg, and it flicks up the legs. So the springs kind of aid in folding up those legs into position. Okay. And then the entire play yard kind of folds in half at that point. So just kind of a small little, nice consumer interaction to kind of help them through the process, controlling the motion of those legs. So, yeah.
What kind of prototyping processes did you employ during the development?
Yeah, quite a bit. So, early on with anything that folds, we'll typically start with whatever materials we just find in the shop. So 2x4s, PVC pipes, tubes. So very crude, nothing looks great, but you can start playing around with, size, proportions, mechanisms, pivot points, all that. And then we move into getting into CAD, kind of roughing it out in CAD. And at that point, we would use typically, so we have some in-house tube bending, sheet metal fabrication that we can do for the tubing, and then we have RP machines, 3D printers that we can do for some of the plastic parts. So those are great because we can do those very quick iterations. Couple days, we'll have parts. The fidelity, the strength of the parts, not great on the 3D printing, at least the internal ones that we use. So once we feel like the design is getting pretty fleshed out and we feel good about it, we'll invest in some nicer prototypes. So we have a couple options. The tubing, we typically at that point will start leveraging the suppliers as they just have more tubing capabilities. And then in terms of plastic parts, we either do CNC'd plastic parts. So this is common in Asia, super inexpensive. Start with a block of polypropylene, or we typically use ABS actually, just easier to machine, cheaper, and just hog out the material. So really high fidelity parts, production representative. So if we're doing like 1 or 2 models, we'll do the CNC plastic parts. If we're doing multiples for line, showing to customers or consumer testing or whatever, we'll do cast urethanes. So we'll build silicone molds and inject it with urethane. And we can use these for, 5, 10 models. And a lot of that we do in-house. We have a great cast urethane department. It's an amazing process, very hands-on. It's an art form, but yeah, that's pretty much it for prototyping.
When you get to the fidelity of a cast urethane part and you're making multiples, I mean, do you use those for marketing samples and things like that too?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the finish on the cast urethane is production quality.
Yeah.
Arguably better than the CNC'd ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then we have a paint department, so we can paint everything and make it look perfect.
Yeah. I've even seen some urethanes where they're textured and they look just like a production part. So
yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. So switching gears just a little bit, what are some of the trends that you see in product development?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know that probably the biggest trend that's on my mind, and I would say probably a lot of brands' minds right now, is just sustainability. And how do we, incorporate that into what we do? There's some really interesting research out there right now that says, the vast majority of consumers are thinking about sustainability at shelf when they're purchasing products, which is, a little bit surprising, just, thinking about the, broad demographics of our country. Sometimes you think a sustainability trend is niche, but research is telling us that it's absolutely not. The question is, how much are consumers willing to pay extra for it? And this is just market to market dependent. Some markets, they are willing to pay extra, some they're not. But the fact that they're considering it, and the fact that we know it's the right thing to do, we definitely have to start thinking about it in terms of how we develop products. So I think the challenge that we are having is, how do we do that cost effectively? There's not an obvious solution, but some of the things that we're looking at are incorporating more sustainable recyclable materials. So either post-consumer recycled materials or bioplastics, sustainably produced silicones. And then I think one of the easiest things we can all do as product developers is just make things that last and make things that are serviceable along the way. It doesn't seem as sexy of a way to get to the sustainable end goal. But I think for too many decades, we've been designing, everything's been just low cost, take it to Asia, crank out inexpensive products. Some of them are single use or limited use, but they're so inexpensive, people don't care, throw them away, you buy another one. I think it's on us to change that and really take time to carefully think through the details. So, things don't break. Because I mean, as silly as it is, you might have one boss on an injection molded part that if you didn't think through the structure of that and it ends up snapping, now your entire product is rendered useless, just because you rushed the development. You didn't need to go sheet metal for that component. Plastic would have worked fine, but you just needed to think a little bit more about the structure and the abuse that that product would see. So, and then the serviceability thing is huge. Making products that can be taken apart and the components that do tend to wear out. One, brands offering replacements for those components so they can swap them out, but then also that it's very easy to swap those components out. Some insurgent brands are getting really good at this, having serviceable items. There's even some phones out there now that are, completely modular. You can swap out components, and the idea is that you really never need to just throw it away and start fresh with a new phone. Mainstream though, this is still not there. But I think it's up to us to kind of start bringing it into the mix, having the conversation, getting it scoped into projects early. So anyway,
you think it'll have a big impact on cost, or do you think like materials will develop that'll help keep costs down, or technologies will develop that'll help keep costs down? Or
it's a good question. I think you probably do need to invest a little bit more cost wise in order to get the craftsmanship and the durability that you need. The sustainable materials are typically more expensive. In some cases, not a whole lot more expensive. I mean, steel is already fairly sustainable. It takes a lot of energy to produce it, but it's recyclable forever. But some of the bioplastics, we might see like a 25% increase in resin cost, which is not massive. But I think in terms of just like the durability of the product, using better materials does help you. But I think also just being a little bit more thorough in our product development and our validation that won't add any cost, but it will ensure that the product lasts longer and withstands the use of our consumers. So yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. I mean, you just see the pressures of, Amazon and some of these very low cost goods, suppliers selling direct. That's just putting such cost pressures on all of our markets that it's challenging then to say, okay, we're going to increase the cost of our product 20% because we want it to be more sustainable. So
right.
Ultimately, I think, consumers are going to have to start changing their purchasing behaviors, but yeah.
Cool. If you could go back in time and change one thing about the development of the products what you've been talking about, what would it be?
For sure, supplier selection analysis earlier. I think looping them in late in the game really put some time pressure on the projects. So
yeah.
Yep.
So to start wrapping up, thinking about your career, all of the challenges and successes and everything you've encountered along the way, what words of wisdom would you share with somebody looking to get into the product development industry?
Getting into the product development industry. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think we have a unique opportunity to kind of shape the future as product developers. We have, the ability to kind of look at how things are done today and think of better ways to do it. So I think, it's up to us to be creative, to think big, to dream, to kind of envision what the future is, and then help us all get there. So be bold, don't be scared away by a big challenge. But I think tempering that with a dose of reality is that there's current limitations in the world, whether it's manufacturing or cost or macro environment, that, it's always good to dream big, to have the vision, to know where you're trying to get to, but you might want to take a baby step to get there. So, just being a little more thoughtful of how you kind of temper those dreams a little bit.
Sure.
But yeah.
Cool. Well, awesome. This has been great. Is there anything else you'd like to mention with regards to the products or product development in general?
No, check us out. Newell Brands has a great portfolio, and Baby Joggers, and, the City Home Collection, really proud. The rest of the portfolio is also great. So yeah, babyjogger.com. Yeah, appreciate it.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes, and everybody click the link and go take a look.
Sounds good.
Awesome, Chad. I really, really appreciate this and appreciate you being on the show.
Sounds good. Thanks, Troy.
To learn more about Impulse and how we might be able to help you, visit impulseproductdevelopment.com.